Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today we're discussing Thompson's War and the burning of Falmouth. Now Falmouth is in modern day Maine, and we know it now as Portland. At the time, it was part of Massachusetts. Before we get started, I have to do a little bit of housekeeping. Unfortunately, I was supposed to attend History Camp Boston this weekend, but with the current sickness that's going around, it was pushed back until July. It's a pretty significant disappointment for me. It was my first public event. I was going to sit on my first panel. I printed up a bunch of pamphlets to hand out with some articles from my website, trying to get people to come join our community here. So it is a disappointment, but on a brighter side, that means I'll be home on Saturday and I can do my weekly live review, which as I said, I do weekly. I talk about the articles I wrote in the past week and what I learned, and we have a discussion about the American Revolution. So if you are sequestered in your house this weekend, as most of the whole wide world seems to be, please feel free to join us at 3 o'clock on Saturday and we'll talk about the American Revolution. It'll be a lot of fun. Now let's get to today's subject. Samuel Thompson is an extraordinarily obscure American founder. We don't have a lot of information about his life, but what we do know is that he was a tavern keeper and a general goods store operator and an innkeeper in Falmouth, Massachusetts. Again, what is today Portland, Maine. So he becomes an early rebel, and he's elected after the First Continental Congress declares a boycott on British goods. He is chosen to sit on the Committee of Correspondence for his town and chosen to enforce the boycott. So a few weeks after the Lexington and Concord, some ships show up and they want to sell some goods. And they're British ships, and Samuel Thompson and his colleagues say no thanks. And then a British Navy ship shows up, and its captain is a man named Henry Mowat. So Mowat comes in, and he says, hey, you definitely should buy these goods. And they're like, no, we don't think so. So Mowat deboards, and he goes to church. What follows, a lot of people at the time didn't think was the best way to go about things, but it was definitely the most strategic. Either while he was at church, or more likely as he's walking out of church, Thompson and some of his men arrest Mowat. Simultaneously, about 4 dozen or so local militiamen board the ships in the harbor and say, get out of here, you're not allowed to sell this stuff here. Now these militiamen put spruce twigs in their hats because they didn't have uniforms. So instead of just doing shirts versus skins, they put a spruce twig in their hat. Now, years later, when Massachusetts formed its own navy, the flag had, and I suppose still has, a spruce tree on it in honor of these gentlemen. So, with the harbor occupied by Patriots and Mowat, the British officer, taken captive, Samuel Thompson said, you get in your boats and you leave. And Mowat said, okay, and he left. And that was the entirety of Samuel Thompson's War, known really as Thompson's War, but I like to keep saying his name so we remember who he was. So they leave, and several months go by. And then Mowat returns. And he says, hey Falmouth, give us your guns and your ammunition, please. And they say, no, we're not going to do that. And he says, okay, then I'm going to bombard your town with cannon fire and burn it to the ground. And the people of Falmouth said, can you give us time to get the women and children out? And Mowat says, sure. You have 2 days. And they had 2 days, and they got all the women and children out. Also, they got out all the men, because who's going to stay in a town that's about to get bombarded by cannon fire? No one. They all left, Mowat opened fire, and destroyed the town. About half the buildings, estimates are anywhere from 300, even maybe as many as 400, but probably closer to 300 buildings burned. And then he sent in some men to, debark. Marines came on to go fight. And the Patriots did stand up for themselves. They did fire back, and they killed off one person, and then one British soldier, and wounded another. And then the British left, and they were there to fend for themselves. Unfortunately, winter was setting in. So there was a lot of charity. People were helping neighbors and all that kind of thing. But a letter was sent back to Cambridge, where Washington and the Continental Army were stationed. And they basically said, hey, Falmouth got burned. And a lot of people, including apparently Samuel Thompson, were at Cambridge helping with the siege of Boston at the time. And all these men from Falmouth asked for leave to go home and help their families, which they were granted, because it just so happens that at this time, when Washington was overseeing his army, there was a committee that had been sent from the Continental Congress to Cambridge to see how the Continental Congress could help Washington oversee the army. And this committee included Thomas Lynch, Benjamin Harrison, and Benjamin Franklin. And they wrote back about Falmouth in their report to the Continental Congress. And they said that when the soldiers asked for permission to leave, it was too reasonable to be refused. Which makes sense. But they also warned that there were rumors that the British were just going to start doing this. They were just going to go up and down the coast, firing on towns till they burned to the ground. And every time they did that, all the men in the Continental Army or whatever militia would request leave to go help their families. And this would essentially destroy the Continental Army. It's kind of impressive that they didn't do this. It seems like a great tactic. It seems like it probably would have worked. Now, fortunately for us Americans today, that's not what happened. But what did happen in direct response to this is the Continental Congress decided to form the Continental Navy. We know that the Continental Navy never became a fabulous navy of any sort. It never had a lot of ships. It didn't win all that many battles. They were lucky that what happened was the French would send their navy over. That was very helpful. But it did lead to the establishment of the Continental Navy. So, as for today's hero, Samuel Thompson, he kind of steps back. He goes back after the war, becomes a leader of Falmouth, helps them rebuild. It would take about 20 years to rebuild this. It was a fairly modestly sized city. 2,000 to 2,500 people was nothing to snuff about at the day. Nothing to laugh about during that period of time. But it also wasn't a monster city by any means. It did take them 20 years to rebuild. They did change the name to Portland, Maine, which I keep wanting to say Portsmouth on accident, but no, Portland, Maine, Falmouth. Then they did rebuild. Samuel Thompson ended up becoming an important leader in the community, and he actually would go to the Massachusetts. Again, Maine was part of Massachusetts. He would serve in the Massachusetts State Assembly for many years, and he was part of the ratification convention when they ratified the United States Constitution, which he was very much against. There are several interesting quotes attributed to him, which I, of course, clicked off of. He said, "It is strange that a system which its planners say is so plain should want so much explanation." And basically he's saying, like, oh, if the Constitution is so obvious, if we obviously need this Constitution, then why do you have to tell us every detail? Why do you really have to sell us on it? If it was that obvious, we should just know. Furthermore, he ends up criticizing George Washington at the convention for owning slaves, saying his character has sunk 50%. Which, not something you really did against George Washington, although I guess Thompson's ambitions were too high, but just before he died, he was elected, instead of going to the Assembly, he was elected to the Massachusetts State Senate, which he served very briefly before he passed away. So today's video is a little long. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Like I said, I'll be back with another video tomorrow, and on Saturday, come join us for the live video. If you like this, please hit like. If you really liked it, definitely subscribe. You can see these videos 5 days a week, plus the live one on Saturday. My name is Jason. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to bringing you another video tomorrow.